Madame Anne Nuorgam, Chair of the Permanent Forum, dear participants of this side event, and respected organizers. Thank you for inviting me to this event, where we have gathered to learn from the experiences of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions around the world. As a representative of the government of Finland, I would like to thank the organizers for their efforts. This is a perfect occasion for interaction between indigenous peoples, academia, and governments. The Permanent Forum focuses on Sustainable Development Goal 16, promoting just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. This side event will reflect on the role of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in attaining this goal and share experiences on best practices. The work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission concerning the indigenous Sámi people is about to begin in Finland. It will be the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission that Finland has ever had. And in this respect, the Commission's work will be a unique historic process for us. Prime Minister Sanna Marin's government has stated in its program that it will respect and promote the realization of the linguistic and cultural rights of the Sámi people in a way that takes the relevant international conventions into account. The work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is also a goal and a commitment of the government. The Prime Minister's office has been preparing for the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in cooperation with the Sámi Parliament and the Sámi Council. The aim of the Commission's work is to identify, assess, and learn from the historical and present-day discrimination experienced by the Sámi people. This includes, for example, the assimilation policies of the Finnish state and violations of the rights of the Sámi people. The task of the Commission is to find out how these injustices affect the Sámi people and their communities today. It is important for the Commission's work to increase dialogue and trust between the Sámi people and the state. The Commission's work aims to promote better opportunities for the Sámi people to maintain and develop their languages and cultures. During the process, efforts will also be made to strengthen awareness of the Sámi people and their cultures among the majority population. The Commission consists of 5 commissioners, 2 of whom are based on a proposal from the Sámi Parliament, 1 based on a proposal from the Sámi Council, and 2 are based on a proposal from the government. The Commission is an impartial and independent body. The preparations for its establishment have been made carefully and over a long period of time. The preparations were launched at the initiative of the Sámi Parliament in October 2017. The actual negotiations between the state, the Sámi Parliament, and the Sámi Council concerning the mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission began in February 2019. The mandate was approved by all parties to the negotiations at the end of 2019. The Sámi Parliament and the Sámi Council has nominated their candidates for the Commission. The government's nominees for commissioners have been mapped out by public officials. it is important that the nominees have the skills needed to encounter and listen to other people, along with wide-ranging experience and knowledge of tasks and responsibilities that will benefit the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As the preparation have progressed, it has become apparent that the Commission's working term will need to be extended until the end of 2023. Adequate psychosocial support is an integral part of the truth and reconciliation process concerning the Sámi people. Psychosocial support must be available for the entire duration of the process. For these preparations, international experiences and experts have been valuable. I hope that the discussions today will further increase our knowledge and understanding of global perspectives concerning the topic. Finnish democracy is based on the rule of law, with the Constitution giving every individual strong protection for human dignity, personal integrity, and other fundamental rights. I am sure we all agree that there is a clear need for the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission concerning the Sámi people. The indigenous Sámi people have experienced and may continue to face racism and discrimination, including at the hands of the state and the authorities. We hope that the Commission will be able to start its important work as soon as possible. Without a deep, thorough understanding of what has happened in the past and how it affects the Sámi people and their languages and cultures today, it will be very difficult for us to find sustainable solutions for the future. With these words, I wish you fruitful discussions and a successful event.
Thank you, State Secretary Malin Pranajar, for explaining the situation of the Finnish Truth and Reconciliation process with the Sámi people. And welcome, Anne Nuorgam, the chair of the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. You have had a busy day managing. How are you? And please welcome to open this side event.
Do you hear me now properly? Good. Indigenous brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to meet with you today in this important side event on Indigenous Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Indigenous peoples have been longing for truth for a long time. We have known how exploitation of other people and nature is hurting us all, and how intentions of dominance are destructive for humanity. A Truth Commission is clearly an instrument which aims to make visible and fight prejudice, and as such, it is a useful instrument, but its terms of reference, specific legal mandate, and operations cannot go forward without our active participation and leadership. I have had the honor to lead the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues at time of global reckoning. Indigenous peoples are ready to stand up not only for their rights, but survival of humanity, earth, land, water, and animals. My message to states and international organizations is working with us is your best chance. I call for United States in this moment of change to help center indigenous voices in rebuilding international order that is not based on legacies of colonialism, but on shared humanity. The false notion of hierarchy of human value is hurting us all. That has to end and change. I promise collaboration with the Secretary Haaland and Ambassador Thomas Greenfield in launching initiative to look beyond these painful legacies in era of truth, healing, and transformation amidst climate crisis. Besides truth, we need reconciliation. At times, some view that reconciliation could mean giving up our rights. That is not true. Reconciliation is an equally important element in survival of Indigenous peoples. Eventually, everything comes down on how people are surviving. We need a lot of healing, we need transformation. Therefore, I'm thankful for the comparative analysis of Eduardo Gonzalez from Mary Hoff Center to provide us lessons learned from the past and current commissions. Every Indigenous people have to define their own development and lead the process they engage in. Therefore, these joint learning spaces are so essential so that we can hear directly from those involved what they have found and what mistakes they did, and also in what they succeeded. My intention is to set up a working group within the UN Permanent Forum to continue to study these cases and counsel in Indigenous people seeking for opportunities of truth, justice, reconciliation, healing, and transformation. Of course, there is a condition that we all members of the Permanent Forum agree upon that. The current Truth Commission initiatives around the world are contributing to enrich that body of wisdom. The growing expertise must find channels of mutual enforcement and innovation through communities of practice, and the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues should have a leading role in convening necessary communities. Truth and reconciliation commissions are still a very open and flexible model, and Indigenous people should not merely apply any preset generic template. Each initiative must respond to the needs, wisdom, and history of our peoples, including the different ways in which we want to use tradition and knowledge, and whether we want to use concepts derived from other legal traditions and cultures. I thank Mary Hoff Center for Reconciliation, Saami Council, and the Government of Finland for helping to convene this timely and important side event, and especially Antti Pentikäinen, working as the person connecting us all. I'm very thankful for all the speakers that have agreed to join us. Now I invite my dear friend Willie Littlechild to share his opening remarks and then ask Antti Pentikäinen to moderate the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We are so thrilled about your leadership, and these is extremely inspiring words. And in case Chief Littlechild has not joined, I suggest that he will join the panel too. So my name is Antti Pentikäinen. I am director of the Mary Hoff Center, and we're just so honored to be asked by UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues to help to convene this event, and also the request for Eduardo Gonzalez to do the comparative analysis. Truth, reconciliation, justice, and healing are deeply meaningful questions and concepts for survival. And they only come alive when they are carried by each individual, by themselves as an individual, but also in their tradition. And this means exactly, I mean, like you said, there is no preset formula. Every nation has to find what these concepts mean and how they need to apply into their situation. So this event has been organized to provide some comparative lessons learned and chances to exchange ideas and connections, how Indigenous peoples can advance their ownership and leadership in developing these concepts to help and assist the survival of your people and the future of our whole communities and humanity, like you, Anne, said. So we will start this next with an presentation of Eduardo Gonzalez based on his comparative analysis. And I hand it over to you, Eduardo, to our colleague, research professor at the Mary Hoff Center. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Antti, and thank you to all our colleagues and friends who are participating in this event. Thank you to the persons who are following the event. I would like to recognize the bravery, I think, and the courage of representatives of indigenous peoples around the world who are able to survive, which in itself is a struggle, in conditions of oppression and marginalization. And I am very glad that I was able, with their cooperation, to put together a few reflections and a paper that has been shared with all the participants on how indigenous peoples have started to use the model of truth commissions and have adapted that model, which was not originally thought, having in mind the situation of indigenous peoples, how they have used that model, I say, to adapt it to their needs and to use it as an instrument to enter and disrupt the public sphere with their demands. I'm going to try to share my screen so you can see the presentation and a couple of elements I want to share with you. I hope you can see this now. Can you?
Yes.
Perfect. So let me then go here. So something that is very important to retain, I think, let me see if I can go here, is that truth commissions are an instrument for the protection of human rights. Truth commissions make visible what is invisible, make an issue get into the national agenda when it has been silenced. And that issue is concretely the situation of marginalization and vulnerability of indigenous peoples, disregarding whether the country where they live is under an authoritarian regime, an internal conflict, or nothing of the like. Indigenous peoples are marginalized, vulnerable, and they are attacked in their way of living, even in countries where you don't have any of those extreme situations. They face the loss of resources, they face the destruction of their culture, and they face the denial of the right to self-determination. And so a truth commission, which has been designed to make those violations visible, may be an important instrument. The issue here, however, is that we need to be very conscious that truth commissions were created in different situations. They were established typically to deal with an extreme violence situation that was relatively recent. So truth commissions have operated to investigate the violence of a recent armed conflict, a recent authoritarian regime. And they have been established with the hope of reconciliation, which is mostly political reconciliation between parties that have been at conflict with each other. A truth commission that would have to think about indigenous perspectives would have to change this paradigm completely. First of all, it would not be enough to think of reconciliation as a reconciliation of political parties. And it would be very difficult for indigenous peoples to think of reconciliation as going back to some perfect or harmonious relationship which never existed, because they have suffered the trauma and the harm of colonization. So for indigenous peoples, using the concept of a truth and reconciliation commission means thinking or rethinking the concept of reconciliation. So instead of national reconciliation, thinking of reconciliation between peoples, from a commission that is based on reports, books, quasi-judicial processes, a commission that is adapted to culturally appropriate mechanisms, from commissions that typically have studied violations against individuals, to think of commissions that can think of violations and harms against peoples and against communities, and from commissions who typically studied very recent violations, we will have to think of commissions that study large, long processes of colonization and abuse. So the history of how truth commissions and indigenous peoples have found each other is somehow long at this point. Several truth commissions, particularly in Latin America, were established at the end of armed conflicts in those countries or dictatorships. I am mentioning here just two examples, Guatemala and Peru, both of which have authoritarian regimes and armed conflicts. And commissions were established in general to investigate the human rights violations that had been suffered in those countries, without necessarily a specific attention to indigenous peoples. However, those commissions found in their work that it was impossible to reconstruct the history of the violations without the perspective of indigenous peoples, because indigenous peoples were affected in their majority, and they were the majority of people harmed. The Guatemalan Commission found out that there was a genocide committed against the Maya Quiché peoples. The Peruvian Truth Commission found that 75% of the mortal victims of the conflict spoke Quechua, the indigenous language of good part of the indigenous peoples of Peru. However, those were, as I said, generic truth commissions that found the violations committed against indigenous peoples. Over time, new models have emerged, meaning specifically creating truth commissions to deal with violations suffered by indigenous peoples. The first one was an experiment in Chile called the Historical Commission for a New Deal, which reconstructed the history of the relationship between Chile and the indigenous peoples in its territory. The most well-known example is the Canadian Truth Commission that operated from 2008 to 2015, which was a commission only focused on one violation suffered by indigenous peoples, meaning the forced assimilation of children through supposedly educational institutions, the Indian residential schools. The survivors of that process of forced assimilation participated actively in the Truth Commission, which was an indigenous experience from the very beginning. It did not focus on other violations. It focused only on violations suffered by indigenous peoples and one particular violation. So what truth commissions have done, and this is what I try to show in the paper that we are sharing today, is to go from these two phases to a new situation. Commissions have initially just found out that indigenous peoples were the majority of the people affected in Latin America, to truth commissions that are specifically focused on indigenous peoples, and now it is indigenous peoples who are taking the lead. Now, the big question to me is whether these new commissions find a balance between the need to move inwardly and providing the support that is necessary to survivors, and at the same time be able to talk to the rest of the population, the non-indigenous population, so that they understand something that has been silenced for such a long time. That is a fundamental act of balance that will need to be investigated. I think also that we need to be very clear that listening to the truth can be disruptive and can be complicated and difficult and tough, not just for indigenous peoples, but also for the non-indigenous population. The non-indigenous population will be very happy to look into reconciliation and to move forward without looking at the past. But they have to listen to what happened, because a reconciliation that is based only on the good feelings that we should be reconciled is not going to be significant for indigenous peoples without acknowledgement of what was inflicted on them. I do think then that three tasks are open at this point. One is innovation, and we are going to see today how indigenous peoples are using notionally the model of a truth commission to create their own processes, which are completely different in name, in spirit, in logic, in methodology. So innovation is fundamental. Participation is central, is essential. I think that if it is an indigenous process, we will have to move forward and progressively to the notion that it is indigenous peoples themselves who will be called to establish, create, and process these commissions in relationship with the state, as it has happened in places like Finland or Australia. And third, I do think that it is fundamental to engage in active consultation. And remember that according to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the right of consultation is fundamental, and Indigenous peoples should be allowed to be consulted freely, previously, and in an informed manner, and that it is their right to give or to withdraw consent on any activity that deals with the rights, including a truth commission or other reconciliation initiatives. So I think these are some of the ideas I wanted to share. Let me see if I can, you can see here in the paper, probably incomplete table of the truth commissions that were established before, the generic commissions, and the truth commissions that are being established now, just focusing on indigenous issues. I think that the sky's the limit, and there are a lot of processes that should be explored. So thank you so much, Antti, and I'm very happy to participate in this event.
Thank you, Eduardo. And I did forget to mention in the beginning that we are recording this to enable others also to benefit from the conversations. And in case you have any issues with that, do relate back to us and we can cut pieces out of based on your request. But we are so deeply thankful and honored to have everyone attending this event. And we have decided to divide this conversation into two panels. And the first panel will look into, based on the current and past models on truth and reconciliation commissions, what has been learned and how the indigenous ownership and leadership can be maintained. And the second panel then will be led by Peter Laiti after a while. Our first speaker in the first panel, he is the chair of the Norwegian Commission to investigate the Norwegianization policy and injustice against the Sámi and the Kven, the Norwegian Finns. Dagfinn Heybråten, we are delighted to have you, and we are thankful for your leadership, long leadership on these matters. And so I appreciate to hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you so much, Antti, and thank you all of you for having me and us here. I'm here also with one other commissioner of the commission I chair. Livingir Zombie will speak at the next panel. As the chair of the commission to investigate the Norwegianization policy and injustice against Sámi and Kven Norwegian Finnish people, I have been invited to give you an update on the Norwegian Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was established by the Norwegian Parliament in September 2018. And according to our mandate, we'll report back in 2022 sometime. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission focuses on two ethnic minorities, in addition to the indigenous Sámi and the national minority called Kvens or Norwegian Finns, all of which are constitutionally recognized as having specific cultural identities and collective rights. In addition, the Commission itself has decided to include a third national minority, which was also Norwegianized in its mandate, the Forest Finns. So this is sort of a combined commission. The driving force behind the whole establishment of the commission was the Sámi Parliamentary Council and the Sámi Parliament. The preparations made by the Sámi Parliament, along with affected communities and organizations, has been of vital importance, both for the establishment of the Commission, but also for the running of the work of the Commission. A strong engagement all along the way. After 2010, there was a desire emerging for an official commission to investigate the assimilation policy of the Norwegian state and its effects, its consequences, following inspirations from commissions in other countries. When it became clear, however, that the Sámi wanted a commission, the Kven Association also asked to be included, and Parliament arranged a hearing to map the need Many from the affected communities share their views and stories reflecting contemporary experiences and continuing effects of Norwegianization and how the impact have been. So all the involved parties were consulted in the process on the mandate, and were also asked to nominate candidates for the commissioners. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created to clarify the history of the relationship between the Norwegian state and the Sámi and Kven, including patterns of discrimination and violation of their rights. The Norwegian Truth and Reconciliation Commission has thus three main tasks. One is to conduct a historical mapping of policies towards the Sámi and Kven, Norwegian Finns and Forest Finns since the 19th century on. Secondly, to lay out and present the current day consequences of the Norwegianization policy in the life of communities and individuals, including new forms of marginalization, injustice, discrimination. And thirdly, to propose measures towards continued reconciliation, as it states in the mandate. The Commission is composed of experts with 11 members and a chair. So these are experts from different fields of experience and academia. The whole commission was appointed by the Parliament after these nominations based on the people's qualifications and expertise in the fields relevant to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work. I think collaboration within all parties, as I said. So you can see here the picture of this diverse group of people representing a broad concept of knowledge, including indigenous methodologies. And speaking of methods, the mandate is quite specific about how the Commission should work and its working methods. The experiences of the affected communities are emphasized. Commissioner Zombie will speak more about this. Collaboration with affected communities, institutions and organizations are also emphasized. And this is expressed in various ways in our work, not at least through the organizing of open joint meetings, hearings. And the working language is Norwegian, but communication is handled in 7 different languages. Moreover, similar inquiries are underway, and we are very inspired by what is now starting up in Finland and also in Sweden. And personally, I see a great opportunity for the commissions to work across these state borders, especially when it comes to measures to continue the reconciliation process. We can certainly, and we do have established initially a dialogue in order to see if we can find some common ground in the proposals that eventually will come out of the commission. We are about halfway, a little more than halfway in our work. I can testify to the fact that this is complicated territory to cover, but I'm very convinced that establishing more of a common understanding of history, what happened, clarifying and laying out consequences up to our own time, and on that basis propose and promote measures of reconciliation is really worthwhile doing, and it's an historic, momentous opportunity that we have embarked on. Thank you very much so far.
Thank you, Dagfinn. And I had the honor and pleasure of helping then the Finnish Prime Minister Juha Sipilä as an independent expert to plan for the Finnish process, and we very much looked into the Norwegians, also because of the confidence and trust of the Finnish Sámi towards what is going on in Norway and that relationship. And what we envisioned then was that the indigenous peoples were way before the nation states were created. And it's our collective responsibility to create conditions for the indigenous people to not be harmed or limited, but strive despite these boundaries. And sometimes this is so helpful because in one state you can have oppressive regime and the space in other states. So I think it's our collective responsibility to make sure that the Sámi have space to survive within all our spaces. And it's a deep honor now for me to transfer to Anni Koivisto. You are the first vice president of the Finnish Sámi Parliament, incredible leader in the space in Finland, and I am assuming internationally in the future as well. So Anni, welcome.
Thank you, Antti, and good evening or whatever time of day is there where you are now. So I'm Koivu Anne, and the Vice President of the Sámi Parliament in Finland, and I'm responsible for the Truth and Reconciliation process together with our President of Sámi Parliament. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here today and talk about the Truth and Reconciliation process with you. I think it's really important we have the chance to talk about this, especially from the perspective of indigenous peoples, and also have the chance to learn from each other. I think I will now briefly share the experience we have had now in Finland, considering the process of Sámi people. I'm sorry, I will maybe have to repeat some points that Malin Brencher already told you in her opening speech. So in Finland, we have experienced that the assimilation policy of state has been affecting and is still affecting Sámi people, both collectively and also individually. And because of that, the equality is not achieved locally, regionally, nationally, or internationally. And we have a significant amount of experience of how Finnish state and its authorities have violated and are still violating our rights. But usually these experiences are not heard, not understood, believed, or taken into account. So I think we came to a point where we had to admit that we don't have any other way out of this situation. And the international examples showed us that maybe this process, maybe Truth and Reconciliation Commission could work here too. So we started thinking, could this be the solution for us in Finland? And the process was included as a part of Sámi Parliament's action plan for the term 2016-2019, and the preparation started in 2017. And thank you, Antti, again for being a part of that too. And 2 years later, 2019, the Sámi Parliament Plenum, the Skolt Sámi Council, and the Finnish government adopted a proposal for establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission concerning Sámi people. Before that, we had many steps, including negotiations, consultations, hearings, and international seminar, like Malin already told you. And the adopted proposal states as follows, that the purpose of the Truth and Reconciliation process is to identify and assess historical and current discrimination, including the assimilation policy of the state and violation of rights, to find out how they affect the Sámi and their communities in the current situation, and to propose ways to promote links between the Sámi and the state of Finland and among the Sámi people. And it also states that this process is supposed to aim to raise the awareness about the Sámi as the indigenous people in Finland, and to ensure that Finland will take responsibility for its actions and work to realize the rights of the Sámi. And this is the basis or the so-called mandate for this work, and after accepting that, we have been doing preparations to get this process started. So the commission hasn't been established yet, But Sámi Parliament and the Sámi Council has named own candidates for the commission and also accepted the candidates of the state of Finland. And we still have some open questions to be resolved before the work can really begin and establishment can be done. First of all, and I think this is the most important one, is to make sure that we have a decent plan for psychosocial support for Sámi people during this process. We know that opening the experiences is not going to be easy for people, and we have many people that has never been able to talk about how the events have been affecting to their lives, and it's going to be hard to start finally talking about those now. And at the moment in Finland, the social and healthcare services for the Sámi people are not working. So we have nothing, and now we have to make sure that when we start this process, the support is available in our own languages and in a way that takes into account our own cultural background as well. And of course, this needs resources. Besides that, we are still negotiating about the practical matters, and this is something I hope we will get some new ideas maybe today from other reconciliation processes, because I think it's really important that before we can start, we have to make sure that the Commission has everything it needs to success in this process. So this is where we are now, and once again, thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Anne-Kihtu. And I'm extremely thrilled to have you and Liz Madison Crow in this panel together. I've been speaking about you to each other, and I think there is so much that can be shared. One of the very significant events for me personally this year has been to get to know Liz LeQuinn, Madison Crow. She is such an incredible leader in this space, and as she always put it, she is relating to what ancestors have been calling and what their advice has been, and then also relating to the wisdom of the ancestors. And so I think she's an example of a leadership that builds on the generations-long knowledge and skills and ability on to lead and define these processes. So Liz, we're so thrilled of everything you've done, the incredible leadership you're providing, not only in Alaska, but whole United States and towards and in this movement. So over to you.
Sanaitla, good day, everyone. Here in Alaska, in my homelands, in Qiqquan, in Tlinkit-Ani and Tlingit homelands. I would say Yake Sutat, good morning. It is wonderful to be here. I'm honored to be in your presence and very humbled. I come with my ancestors into this space, and I'm grateful to be able to have heard those who spoke before me as we are engaged in this process right now in Alaska. So I want to lift up my ancestors as Auntie shared, and let you folks know who I am and who I belong to. I belong to the Kachari, the freshwater mark Sakai salmon people of our Tlingit people. I belong to the Chichkitne, our hummingbird people of my Haida family, from Haida Gwaii, Haida bird, and here at home in Qiqquan. And I lift them all up in front of me so that you will know who I am and who I belong to. Thank you for having me today. As I listened, I was just inspired by the fact that there are so many efforts to bring to the front the truth, as Eduardo shared, to bring into visibility that which has been hidden for too long, for far too long. Here in Alaska, our endeavor is called Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And we don't call it reconciliation because to reconcile means to restore a relationship. But we have never had good relationships. We never started that way with the United States or here in Alaska. And so instead of having that as a false narrative for our story, we've focused on what we want to see accomplished. We want to create a place for the truth to be told. We want to right wrongs. We want to work within a healing space. And we want to transform our lives, our people's lives, and the lives of all Alaskans, because we know that when we are able to address these things, we will actually allow us to go to the next level of where we can be as peoples of Alaska. So our process, like so many of those that were just described, has multiple different parts to it. It's a living entity of our peoples, constructed by their wisdom. This is not a government sanctioned or created or driven or authorized process for us. It comes from our people. And we call it the process itself, we call it a truth, racial healing and transformation tribunal. Now, we really had struggles, and we still are uncomfortable with that word, and yet it was the best word to describe the kind of space we were creating so that our people could know the serious implications we understood in creating a space to hold their truths, to be worthy of their truth, to approach it with a serious, full heart, to prepare ourselves. We also worked with our Native healers and continue to work with our Native healers from across the state. And the first question we asked them when we first brought them together was, how do we create a space for the truth to be told in a way that will uphold those truths without reharming our people? How do we create a process that reflects our shared Indigenous values? As many of you know, in Alaska, we are not a monolith of Indigenous people. We have 229 federally recognized tribes. We have 12 very distinct nations of Indigenous peoples who are as diverse from one another as a Navajo would be diverse from an Inupiaq. That is how diverse a Tlingit is from a Yupik. And so our diversity is actually a strength created by Alaska itself, who birthed us as her Indigenous peoples. Diversity is something that comes from the land here. And so we have to maximize the strength of it. And the way that we've done that is to involve people from across the state in helping us shape and form what they were looking for. Because our people have been calling for a TRC, or a Truth and Reconciliation type convening, for a long time. And we asked them, what do you want this to be like? What should we include? How should it be shaped? How do we operationalize our values? And so the tribunal space, which was all supposed to launch in person in 2020, as we know, that could not happen. And so we had to modify it for a virtual space, which we launched at the end of September with one tribunal. The components of the tribunal are fairly simple in that we have story guardians, and these are the people that our people will respond to, people who are there for an immediate and heartfelt connection with those who are coming to testify, so that they know they're being heard by people who care about them and understand them. Also, these are people who are not so busy that they're checking their emails and their cell phones all the time, who can be locked in on their testimony and who are there to be there for them. Also, we have our healers. Our healers are there to support the entire endeavor, but they're also there to help support the testifiers and the other members of the process throughout. And then the other members are our accountability partners. Now, accountability partners are representatives of governments, of agencies, of churches, of businesses, of social groups, even individuals. And the accountability partner's role is to be a deep listener during these tribunal spaces. Their other role is to examine their legacy. And the question we pose to them is, what had to happen to Alaska Native peoples and other peoples of color in Alaska now? What had to happen to us in order for you to be here? Examine the legacy. Go back into your historic past, examine that legacy, be prepared to share the truth of it, and then working with those who have come to testify and all of those involved in the tribunal and our communities where we're hosting these, sharing that truth, and then also co-designing and co-developing a new legacy, learning how to intervene in their institutions and their systems of influence where they have influence, learning how to do that and having a plan to do that, and then implementing it. And then the other piece of that is that everyone all together within that tribunal space has an opportunity to also co-design multiple different types of solutions: social, institutional, systemic, policy, that will actually advance and push the transformation that we are seeking. So there are multiple components that will come out of that, the different research that folks talked about before, kind of the methodology of the things that will be shaped or will come out of or arise because of the testimonies, and be driven by our people. But the process itself is created by, convened by, and hosted by our peoples. And the accountability partners are there in the space of a state actor, but we are asking them to come to participate in the truth-telling of the legacy that they have benefited from and that they carry today, and be able to really bring that truth out so that we can co-create something different in the future together. So that's really kind of what's driving the way that this is shaped now. We anticipate conducting a few more virtually, and then hopefully as we begin to come back out of this pandemic, we'll be able to go into the in-person cohort-based model of our tribunals, which will be in our communities around the state, which will incorporate ceremony, celebration, an opportunity to grieve together, and an opportunity to roll up our sleeves and co-create these solutions and action plans. We chose our first one to focus on protecting our ways of life, which to us means our hunting, harvesting, gathering, fishing, ceremonies and sharing that we do. And we chose that one purposely because while there is great harm there and criminalization of our peoples for practicing our ways of life, there's also a advocacy and a sharpness to the way that we engage in protecting it, which is different than talking about boarding school harms. And we did not want to enter into a space of bringing up boarding school harms or any of those others virtually, because there's more of a wound there that has not had the ability to heal yet. And we had to be responsible for our people's healing, and creating a space for them means that we have to understand some of these issues that will be brought up. We need to be in person in order to hold them correctly and be worthy of their stories. So that is kind of the shape of where we came from in this effort, and kind of a path that we are on. And we have much to learn and much to continue to do. But we know that if we continue to center our Native peoples, their wisdom, their knowledge, their expertise, and we hold them up above all others, we will finally be able to have a little bit of equilibrium in a space designed for our healing and to help Alaska heal. So much for allowing me to be here with all of you.
It's so beautiful and powerful to hear how your ancestral wisdom and the ownership of your different nations and peoples defines a process and what it means to live through the healing and transformation through those traditions. And maybe if we may, I would put to the panel the question of what could the Nordic models learn from this, where, like Liz said first when we met, to me, that we didn't want a group of white people where our people would go and cry about their suffering. We wanted that to be centered in our tradition. And that's where the idea of an accountability partner came. And so is there anything from this learning that could be applied in the Nordics, especially in the struggle of well-being, healing, and survival of the indigenous peoples?
If I may start out, Antti, I would first of all thank you so much for this rich sharing of different perspectives. I think we can learn greatly from the Alaskan way, not in the way that, as Eduardo said, there is no blueprint or template for doing this. But I think there is a core of similarity, even if the structures are totally different, and that be the necessity to really take into account and listen in and the experience of the peoples. Their perspective is important in itself. It has a value in itself. It's not just a way of achieving the mapping of history and consequences. It's the personal experience of the peoples, the families, historically as well as contemporary. That is very strongly a part of our mandate, and I think the way you do it is very inspiring, and I would really like to learn from how that process plays out once it gets started fully, I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. You want to react to this?
Yeah, actually, in my opinion, the inclusion of indigenous people in these processes is maybe the most important thing, and I feel like we could learn from the other processes, and of course now we are in the beginning, and the Commission will start its work maybe this spring, and I'm hoping the Commission will listen to the voices from around the world and make sure that when they are doing its work, they will include Sámi people, because I think the main principle in the whole process is actually trust, and if the people aren't involved, there is not going to be trust. So I think that's actually the main principle. And also about the solutions of the processes. There was recently published this documentary film by Suvi West called Met, Our Silent Struggle. And there was this one Sámi person telling that he doesn't need this process. He doesn't feel this process is for himself. He doesn't want to be like open up and cry and tell about his experiences and wait for something to happen to him, but he is doing this because he feels that it might help the next generation. Maybe his grandchildren doesn't have to have the same struggle. And I hear many like same kind of issues and thoughts from you, Liz, also. So I feel this is really, really meaningful.
Thank you. And Liz, do you feel like reacting to what was said?
Yeah, I feel, you know, the the opposite side of your question, Auntie, is what can we learn from the processes of our Indigenous brothers and sisters in other countries, dealing with other state actors, and the process by which they may or may not yet be kind of contemplating around the centering of Indigenous people in those efforts, and thinking about, for us, and this is something that is different from others that are state driven, is, you know, because we are not driven by the state, we are not funded by the state, and we are not beholden to the state, but also we are not using that state kind of political authority by which we would compel quote unquote witnesses to come forward. We know that there may be other things that evolve out of this process. What we did not want was for anyone else to control our narrative, control our truth, and control our people. We've had enough of that. It has only damaged us, and it has only damaged our homelands, and it has only damaged this world. And so as we think about and learn from other endeavors that are happening, that's the question we're asking ourselves. It is one of the reasons we created the accountability partner relationship. And we're really, you know, in a space of trying to understand and think through how you have that level of agency and power without giving up your people's ability to center what they need to. And the other component of this is really linked to the healing. So it's not just one kind of healing, right? It has to be any kind of healing that the people who are participating and your people as a whole need. So it's kind of from a non-judgmental space, what kind of supports can we give our people who participate so that they are not left open and wounded and hurt further, but rather they have a place to go? Is that to speak to a Western-based type of counselor or therapist? Is that to speak with and work with a native healer? Is that to go to their pastor of their church? Is that to go out to the land and be a part of our homelands and just disappear from contact with humanity for a little while to recenter the right relationship that we have with the presence of our homelands and the power of our place? What is that healing that will help support the continuing evolution and strengthening of our intergenerational process? So I appreciate the other models because of that. It helps us continue to think through what's possible.
Thank you, Liz. And I think the beauty of your reflection in this is that even a TRC is a limited space and time. And this is a very long process, and gaining the ownership by the peoples themselves makes that continue in a very independent way. And you're just speaking to the state of the art in this field. And I think, Eduardo, one of our intention was to convene a paper that would be kind of foundation for sharing. And you have been also talking with Anne Nuorgam about a community of practice that are now announced to be like a working group within the UNPFI you want to say something about potential sharing that will happen in the future? And then I would just ask very quick question, final question for my panel about, do you have any specific topics where you would wish to have sharing with other Indigenous people and entities involved in these processes? So we can take a record of that, and then I'll transfer to the second panel.
Thank you, Antti. Very briefly, just to say that I feel very humbled to participate in this conversation. Whatever I have put in my paper or the expertise that I may have is really the result of interacting with so many advocates and creators in the indigenous populations who are the ones creating these initiatives. So I am, as usual, extremely impressed by the creativity and the flexibility in which a model that I know well, a Truth Commission, has been adapted. So I do think that what is necessary is to talk among each other. I am seeing in the in our call that there are a few questions and people writing from different places asking to get together and to learn from each other. So I do think that the initiative by Anne Norgam of establishing some kind of a permanent group for studying questions of truth and reconciliation is extremely timely. And I think we at the Mary Hawk Center for Reconciliation should definitely be offering our services to that.
Thank you, Eduardo. And if you, in this first panel, have any specific questions you would like to point out, perhaps as handing over to the second panel, feel free to do so, or put them in the chat. Anyone want to have final word?
I can say something. I think, for example, when I'm talking about the psychosocial support, which actually Liz also kind of talk about, but maybe we use different words, and if we use the same word, we maybe sometimes mean something else. So I guess the proposal that we could share these experiences more is also important because we could maybe learn of the thinking of other indigenous peoples as well. Like, for example, the psychosocial support. I have been talking about that a lot, but then at the same time, I have always wanted to highlight that this process cannot lead to something where Sámi people become as objects of something, but we have to be subjects, and we have to find a way to heal ourselves. So actually, we are talking about same things, but maybe the systems in around the world are very different, and we also have to kind of make some change, to choose something that is suitable for us and is also going to lead to something in the country we are in. Because, for example, in Finland, the Sámi people can take the responsibility. We can do a lot, but in the other hand, the state of Finland has the power. So that's why we feel it's really important that the state is also involved and can then after this process change the laws. But I feel like maybe we could have done something else and chosen some other way, like doing it only between Sámi people.
Thank you, Anni, and I apologize for the benefit of time. Dakvin, if you have very short remark, that will be okay, and then we transfer to the second panel.
I'll be very, very brief. I think what we've heard about healing and reconciliation, or healing, as Liz put it, is an extremely important part of it, and it needs to involve the peoples and their ways and their thinking. our truth and reconciliation process is definitely not state-driven. It has initiated by the Sámi Parliament and the Parliamentary Council. It's driven by a broad grassroots mobilization, and then the Parliament decided to back this initiative as was requested. The advantage by this form is that, especially when it comes to the investigative part, we are scrutinizing the history, and we have all the powers to do so towards the state, towards the state authorities, the archives, all the sources on that side, and that gives a platform for the truth part of the history reconstruction or communication that is essential, I think, to us. When it comes to the reconciliation or the healing part, I think we still have a long way to go to develop that, and I think in the spirit of this panel, let's share openly and with a humble heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Dagfinn, and thank you, Andy, for raising the question, and Liz, thank you for providing that guidance. I think I'm not the only one. When an ancestral wisdom is brought to the discussion, there is a feeling that you want to stay in the presence of that wisdom. So thank you, everyone, for bringing that to this conversation, and Eduardo for your assessment. Now we're transferring to the panel 2, and as it seems, like Eduardo said, these struggles are at times very long, demanding, and hurtful. New people emerge to provide leadership, and in Finland we're really fortunate to have Petra Laiti as one of the young Sámi activists making the voice really loudly heard. It is not possible to enter in a healing process when the state is continuing with oppressive policies, and so thank you, Petra, for everything you have done. It's been a long and hard struggle, but we so appreciate your leadership. I hand it over to you.
Good evening, brothers and sisters, and thank you for that introduction, Antti, and thank you so much for inviting me to host this second panel for you. My name is Mikku Ilmara Mika Petra Laiti. I am a 26-year-old Sámi rights advocate, and I've been involved with Sámi issues, I suppose officially for about 5 or 6 years now, but I remember holding my first presentation about the Sámi people when I was 8 years old, so it's been a long career for me. I'm deeply humbled by the amount of expertise I have with me on this panel today. Before we begin, though, I would like to acknowledge the fact that I'm very overjoyed, and it really warms my heart to see so many participants and familiar faces and names with us here today. And I hope you all are able to stay safe during these times. So going into the panel, we have an opening presentation by Mr. Marcus Stewart, who is the co-chair for the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. And after Mr. Marcus's presentation, we have a panel with, I'm told, Chief Wilton Littlechild. Chief, welcome to this panel. Thank you so much for joining us. And as well as Liv Inger Somby from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Norway. And then Kusla Kessler-Mata, who is a council member at the California Truth and Healing Council. Thank you so much for being with us today. Before we go into the discussion, I would like to invite Marcus Stewart to take the floor and have your presentation. Marcus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Petra, and thanks for the opportunity. And I should say good morning. It's currently 2:30 a.m. In Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, so it's bright and early. I apologise in advance. I'm starting to lose my voice, so I do apologise. My name is Marcus Stewart. I'm a Nira Illumbullock man of the Tanarung Nation in Central Victoria in Australia. And as is our custom, I want to acknowledge the traditional lands of where I am and say Wawagi Weberang, Luik Nugan Gaguk, Wawagi Yumagu, Bulabuk. So I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the lands of where I am today, and I pay respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge their country. I've got a slide which I'm about to share, and hopefully it works. Can everybody see that? Perfect.
Yes, we see it now.
Oh, thanks, Petra. So a little bit about who we are as the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. So we're the first of its kind in Australia, leading the journey towards treaty. We were elected at our historic elections that were held in October 2019, which feels like a lifetime ago. Then we had an international pandemic in between that. And we're made up of 31 leaders, traditional owners of country in Victoria, all entrusted by Aboriginal communities and traditional owner nations to lead our journey and our aspiration towards treaty. So we have a clear mandate which is led out in legislation, which a piece of legislation that became law in 2018, which was advancing the treaty process with Aboriginal Victorians 2018. And it sets out really 4 key roles. And one was to establish a treaty authority, which is the independent umpire to bring parties together when negotiating treaties. A treaty negotiation framework, which is the ground rules for negotiations, and a self-determination fund. So funding such negotiations were never subject to political will or government budget bids. There was an independent source of revenue. And what we learnt early last year is it was going to be really difficult to go down a line of treaty making in our state without a truth and justice process. And so I'll move on to the next slide. So back in June 2020, our 31 leaders, our chamber, as we refer it to, or refer it as, called for on our state government. So our process that we're establishing is from a state point of view or a province point of view. It's not a federal process across all of Australia. We'd love to see that happen. But unfortunately, at this point in time, we've got a government that lacks leadership, lacks political will, and just does not provide any leadership on such issues. So in June 2020, we called for a truth and justice process to start telling, or for our communities to come forward and speak their truth and tell the true history of our state and nation in particular. In July 2020, the Victorian state government committed to such a process. I think what was uniquely different about us going down this process is our call for such a Truth and Justice Commission, which is called the Europe Justice Commission, which Europe meaning truth in the language of the Wamba traditional owners in Victoria and New South Wales for that matter. We developed a mandate where we held the pen. We co-authored what this needed to look like on behalf of, based on consultations with our community, made sure that it met their design, their aspiration of what this had to look like. We didn't want the government to go ahead and develop a terms of reference by just consulting with us. We wanted to be front and center and make sure this was in our cultural shape. This addressed what our Aboriginal communities wanted and needed. And so we've got a very broad mandate of where we look back 233 years since colonisation in our state and in our history. but a broad mandate that looks at the violence of the massacres that occurred upon colonization to our people, the cultural violations, the human rights violations and breaches, and where it meets international standards, the intergenerational trauma that we've currently heard about, and that process of healing, and also the contemporary issues of why our Aboriginal people in this country overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We held a royal commission, which is our highest level inquiry, 30 years ago, and the anniversary was last week. And since that royal commission, we still have our people dying in the prison system. We've had 470 plus deaths, but also looking at the child protection system and the forced removal and the separation of our families. But some of the, I guess, the positive nature, the resilience of our culture and our people, of why we're still here. We're still connected to our country and our traditional lands. We're still connected to our culture and our practices. So we wanted to make sure that that was all captured and included. And that's why we've got quite a broad mandate for the Yoorrook Justice Commission. We've seen now the government come out and commit to this process, which we anticipate the commission will be stood up in June. We also wanted to look at how we went about selecting commissioners. Through the design of the mandate, we decided we wanted 5 commissioners, 3 being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. 2 of those 3 commissioners had to be traditional owners of country in Victoria. And also 1 of those 3 commissioners had to be an elder who brought the wisdom and guidance to this process, because our treaty journey and our journey now towards truth has been built on decades of activism by our Aboriginal communities and traditional owner nations, and generations of activism. So we use a saying here that, you know, we walk in the footsteps of giants, those giants being our elders and our ancestors. And we've been lucky enough, through the unity of a political entity such as us, unity is power. And so when we've called on these key, you could say, initiatives, we've been successful in the government coming forward and agreeing to it, but also being able to work in partnership and co-author the mandate, so it completely met the aspiration of our communities, and it wasn't just what government wanted to look at, it was what we wanted to look at as the First Nations people of this state. So in this selection process of commissioners, we wanted to look at models of international best practice. So what we agreed to do is have an open and transparent process to build trust and to build confidence amongst our traditional owner nations and Aboriginal communities in Victoria. So we opened applications a couple of weeks back for anyone who wanted to, I guess, put an application forward to be a commissioner and put forward their, I guess, their case of why they should be part of the commission going forward and why they should be one of the leaders as a commissioner. And applications closed, I think it was a week ago, and the shortlisting begun. So part of that process is, once the shortlisting was complete, we wanted a public submission process. So all the shortlisted candidates are now, that information and their public statements are publicly available, where our community and the broader Victorian community can put through a public submission whether they support or don't support an application. And in 5 hours time, just to go back one step, we also established an independent assessment panel, which we saw as critical. And what we agreed is that there'll be 4 people on the independent assessment panel, which will make recommendations on commissioners. 2 of those being First Peoples Assembly representatives. 1 of those representatives being a state government representative, and another one being a representative from the International Centre for Transitional Justice, who also sit on the assessment panel with us. So 4 current people sitting on there, including myself. And so we, in 5 hours' time, start our interview process on shortlisted applicants, and we hope to have the York Justice Commission up and running by mid-June, with an anticipated initial or interim report 12 months on from that. And at the moment, there is a commitment for it to run for 3 years. But our view in community is that this will need to run as long as it needs to run. And we're really strong and firm on that view. But importantly as well, under how this will run and the powers it'll have the powers of a Royal Commission. And as I said earlier, they have, under the Inquiries Act, is the highest level of inquiry in our country and in our state. And if people want to find out more information, they're welcome to go to our website and check it out at www.firstpeoplesbic.org. But Petra, I might leave it there, and then I guess once the questions start on the panel, we can dive a little deeper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. That was very informative. One of the things that really resonates with me in both your and Eduardo's previous presentation is, in fact, that, and I suppose this is a thing that is neglected, I think, in the Nordic discussion regarding TRCs, is the fact that Indigenous people are, in fact, healing from human rights violations, and very violent ones, oftentimes. And so referring to that, if Chief Wilton Littlechild is with us on this call, I would like to invite him to be our first speaker of the panel. I see, Chief, that your camera has been turned off, but I hope you can hear us. I hear no response, but we'll give it a minute. And perhaps move on to leaving Ersonby then and wait for the Chief to join us again. Liv, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself. You are obviously a part of the Norwegian Truth and Reconciliation process. So I would like to invite you to share your experiences in that process, and perhaps a question for you, since this is a topic that is very close to my heart. I was wondering if you have any personal thoughts on how the Sámi Truth and Reconciliation process for us as a people is affected by the fact that we have so many state borders that divide us as a people, and how that has been discussed in these national processes on a national level. So please, leaving Ersonby, you have the floor.
Mika Petra. Thanks a lot, Mika Petra. Bara päivitiki puhkai ja musta tervoida jätsemme alamuistiki puhkaida. Maailmi alkalmukita ja asvaltida. I'm just sending greetings from my people to all the indigenous peoples who are watching this worldwide. That's a very good question, if I can start with that, because it is in one way also, we all know that the Sámi people, they are divided into 4 countries: Russia, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And in 3 countries, they are now working with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And then we have the 4th country where we are not having the same develop as we would like to have. But I was also asked to have a 5 minutes presentation, and if I can talk briefly about the methods and how we are working, and also how my role as a Sámi is in this commission, if it's okay, Petra. Yeah. I have worked as a journalist and editor and project manager for many, many years. It means that I have been working from the age of 14 until I was 56 years old. So it means that I have been working for a long time as a journalist, and also including, I have worked in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And last 4 years, I have worked at Sámi University of Applied Sciences, teaching journalism and indigenous journalism at bachelor and master level. So you all know that I grew up in the Finnish side of Sápmi, and I live now in the Norwegian side. My story for the Commission starts when I'm 7 years old. I didn't know anything about that, but one day I was told that I have to go to school. I didn't know that where I was going. I didn't know for how long I was going to be there. I was sent to a boarding school in August, and I was only once at home from August to December, and once at home from January to April. And I stayed in a boarding school for 9 years. And as a young child, I started to observe what is happening in the boarding school. I started also to ask questions. And they have all been part of my life. The way I am now also as a person, it's also that the burden I'm carrying from the years at the boarding school. Right now, I am also working, I have changed my position. I'm working as communication director at Sámi Digi, or Sámi Parliament here in Norway. I will try to move the slide. Yeah. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Norway, we have had focus on how Sámi people and Kven and Forest Finns as individuals and as group has experienced assimilation, policy and injustice. Therefore, we in the Commission shall ensure that everyone has an opportunity to share her or his experiences and accounts of injustice committed against them personally or others close to them, and how it impacts of the injustice have affected or continue to affect their lives. We are doing interviews, but we also know that because of the current pandemic situation, it has also consequences. That it means that we are also a little bit late and we are not able to visit those who we really would like to visit and to collect stories. My role in this commission is as a Sámi speaking, to do the interviews, to meet the people, but I'm also the face for the Sámi people, that they call me, they talk to me, they stop me, and they're wondering if they stop me to tell that they have a story. And many also, they stop me because they're wondering, how are we working? Because they're also anxious to know, how are we going forward with this process? As the mandate of the Commission points out, that the Norwegianization policies has had consequences for individuals and for groups. And our informants, those who are giving us their stories, they're talking about the unequal relationship, how they have experienced the situation between being minority and also how the majorities are treating them. And also their struggles, their daily struggles. And assimilation policies has had practices that diminished their opportunities for the Sámi, Kvens, Norwegian Finns to use their own language or languages and to practice cultures and traditional livelihood. Many of the stories that I have been collecting is also about how they have been silenced, not only for years, but they have also been silenced for many decades. I will now show a part of a longer interview where a young Sámi woman, Storinramna Ristenramna Hilde Sandra Nikkinen Persson, tells about the consequences of Norwegianization and her experiences. So if we can now look at the video.
Jeg tenker jo at det de unge, det vi som kommer etter, som trenger fokuset, eller kanskje mer ønsker det, fordi at vi har valgmuligheten. Altså det vi som står med det i handa nå, og har muligheten til å bringe det videre. Så jeg håper jo at det kommer noen gode muligheter for dem som kommer etter, og at det belyses senskader, rett og slett. For det jo det. Det så mange senskader. Men også er jeg litt opptatt av at man ikke skal være et offer nå, men heller se muligheter man har til å ordne det.
Når du sier senskader, har du noen sånne eksempler på?
Jeg sitter her og snakker norsk. Det er en senskade. Det vil jeg absolutt si.
Yeah, thanks to Sandra for sharing her story. And you see that as a former journalist, I am used and I would like to film these people who are talking with us. So we have a stories for generations in the after. People in next 100 years or 120 years, they can go in and look at the stories that we have been collecting. Because this is also about the story with Sandra and many others. It's the importance of untold and unheard stories. As a young journalist, I started to ask questions. How come that we are not conducting stories from the elder people? And how come that we don't hear them? So in a period of 3 years, I conducted stories from 27 women who are born between 1895 and 1930. I was doing the interviews in Norway and Finland and asking them about the stories, about what are the stories you are carrying with you that you are not talking about. And so it was a huge project, but it's also the way that I'm used to work to find the narrative methods and how to conduct the stories. What I experience in this commission is that people are ready to talk. They are ready to talk about the days in a boarding school. Many of them I have met, they have said that I've been waiting for you because we have never talked about this. Can you imagine being a child, being at the school system, coming home and not telling the stories, how it is to be a child? Even myself, I never told my stories to my parents. I have also conducted people or interviewed people who are talking about very difficult court cases where Samis are losing their cases, and also the system that doesn't understand the traditional knowledge and also the struggles that Samis are having. And I have also stories that are about not understood by the authorities. I feel in one way when I'm in this commission that there is a wall of silence. Is that what we all also experience? Or a pain that is flying with us in the wind? Because this pain, no one is catching it. Many of them we have met the last 2 years. They are carrying a silence from the past. And it has been very difficult for them to talk about the pain, the struggles, the traumas, and the discrimination, the pain and shame that they have been carrying for years. These experiences have had an impact to the younger generations too. Some of them are also carrying and suffering traumas from their grandparents and parents and other relatives, and what they have experienced with assimilation, discrimination, and also being part of this harsh Norwegianization. The Commission, we cooperate with the Sámi Psychiatric Center for Mental Health, Sanag or SANGS. The Sámi Clinic offers psychosocial support for people who have had shared or experiences and that they need to be healed to help forward. And also this is something that is offered also to us, because believe me, many times when we are meeting people, it means that we also need someone to talk with. Because you can imagine that getting these stories of people who are silenced and that they haven't told about what they have experienced and how difficult the life went on just because of being a Sámi or a Kven or a forest film. This complex context with difficult experiences makes our work in the Commission challenging. And we have to ask ourselves how to support the people to find strength and courage to bring their experiences and stories to the light. The Commission has therefore challenged the traditional academic methods with the methods that treat people, narratives with a culturally appropriate and culturally sensitive frameworks, as Gonzalez writes in his essay. I want to say something from a woman born in 1909, one of the women I met, because she gave me the key to understand that there are methods of also how to conduct my own people. She said, I trust that you do not destroy my stories. Keep to my truth and do not add anything more. So I had to make agreements that I will use my time, I will use my knowledge to understand what the people are talking about. And that's also what I bring to the Commission, or what we are bringing to the Commission, that we have to understand from which perspective the people are trying or willing to tell their stories, their personal stories. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Norway has developed varied methods to gather in testimonies and narratives related to the Norwegianization's policy and policy practices. And we also have open meetings and gatherings where people they have the possibility to tell their stories together with others. We are also planning, because of this pandemic situation, we were also planning to have groups where we can also work with healing, and also that those who really want to share their stories in small groups, that how we can help them also.
I hate to interrupt you, Liv, but we are a bit pressed for time. So if you could give any closing remarks to this.
Yeah, I can just say that Commission has committed. We have around 200 interviews and 80 people, they have sent their written stories to the commissions, and we have quite many people who are waiting for us, and we have organized 17 open meetings where almost 100 people have shared their experiences regarding the Norwegianization. Yeah, and yeah, I will stop there because I can continue afterwards. I have one more thing, is to choose the language. I think it's very important when we are conducting, when we are talking with the people, that they're able to choose the language. Not that we are not choosing the language for them, but they are able to choose the language, how they want to communicate with us. Thank you. Kiitos.
Olo kiitos, Liv, Inger. That was very, very informative and very encouraging. I would like to invite Council Member Kusla T. Kessler-Mata to take the floor to give your perspectives on Indigenous healing, I suppose. But I would also like to ask, in reference to particularly Liv Inger's presentation, I think I would say that since it is a given fact that truth and reconciliation processes are very different depending on the generations that it touches, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what generational differences there might be in how Indigenous communities heal. Perhaps, for instance, how youth need healing within Indigenous communities, and how that is different towards the how elders need healing in different communities. So if you would like to share your thoughts and experiences, you have the floor.
Hi, great, thank you. And thank you to everyone for sharing all of your wisdom. I admit that the California Truth and Healing Council is quite new and quite fresh. So this is really a great learning experience for me. So I appreciate all of your words. So just quite briefly with regard to the specific question that you're asking, we have established a subcommittee for youth participation in the commission or in the council. We actually are still in the process, though, of really structuring the council. And this demand for a youth council or subcommittee was really a result of the public input process. So the various meetings that we've been holding with community, unfortunately at this time still through Zoom, but that's one of the important, one of the things that we're responding to kind of in terms of the interests and demands of the community. I have a lot of thoughts more generally about the limits and challenges of structures, and and I've kind of picked up on a lot of different themes that my co-panelists have been discussing. Let's just say we do need to do more to incorporate more community voices and to make sure there's an elders voices in the council. Those are things that we, let's just say, walked into a structure that was not necessarily devised to accommodate all of those things initially. So we are in a process of trying to craft it in a way that'll work for us, because ours is a state-driven initiative.
Thank you so much. Since we have a little bit of time left, I would like to invite Chief Wilton Littlechild to share his thoughts on the discussions we've had today, but also on your experiences with the Truth and Reconciliation process in Canada. Perhaps you would like to shed light on how you think that one could ensure that these processes these commissions are providing support for Indigenous healing and survival. So if you're available to speak, Chief Littlechild, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Tansen dotentik nigan ksemantonen askoma igo ke soemgoya ka seminano tsumstahe ekse nenanaskomun maikan mohteun sigason maskochi sikoche. I just greeted you all in my language in Cree to introduce myself and also to greet all of your excellencies, the panel members, the hosts. I use my language just to remind us that this year, next year actually, begins a decade, the International Decade on Indigenous Languages. And why do I say that? Because the one of the things that was prohibited for us was to not be allowed to speak our language while I was in residential school. So I think that I'll just cut my remarks down quite a bit to, I see my battery's just about dead. I'm out in a bush and I've been having trouble connecting, but I've heard all of the presentations, and I think Eduardo will agree with me when I say that we've heard a bunch of new created bodies. There's no one model for Indigenous peoples. Everyone has designed their own, as we have. Ours is unique because it's a court-ordered mandate. It was because of lawsuits. I don't know if you can still hear me. It looks like I'm out of contact again.
We can hear you. We can hear you. We can't see you, but your voice is enough.
Okay, thank you. So it's unique because it's the first court-ordered mandate of a truth commission. What happens to children when you take them away from their parents? And what happens to the parents when you take your children away from them by law, an assimilated process by legislation, actually? And what happens to the children that come after? These were questions we had to deal with in our court-ordered mandate. For 5 years, we went across Canada listening to survivors of residential schools. We heard about 7,000 testimonies. Some were good, but some were very, very horrific stories of physical, mental, spiritual, psychological, cultural, and worst of all, sexual abuse throughout the time that the residential schools were in operation in Canada. So we did our hearings, and then the court extended our mandate for another 1.5 years. We issued 94 calls to action as a result of our 6.5-year Truth Commission. And one of the questions you wanted to hear from me was how our findings, where we made 94 calls to action, are being integrated into the society, into Canada. And for me, it's quite encouraging because I spent 14 years of my life in residential school, 3 different schools. And the previous speaker noted that they were able to go home sometimes. I was not able to go home. Many times I had to stay in the school for the whole year because I was raised by my grandparents, and I just couldn't go home. So it was a horrific impact on me personally, not to be able to see my grandparents or my parents since we were cut off. So as far as a recommendation that I might leave with you from the 6.5 years that we did our commission, the South African commissioners told me once that we wish we did it your way. And I asked them why, because you're the most world famous commission. And they said you did it differently. You did it culturally relevant. And I would recommend, I think you all know this and are doing it already by the sounds of it, that it must be culturally relevant. And also that means before you ask someone to testify or give you their testimony, their story, their truth, that there be medical support, mental health support, cultural support, and spiritual support around that individual. Because as you heard, many people have been hiding this story for 50 years, 60 years. Our families don't even know what happened to us as children because we've been hiding it. But with the Truth Commission, like I say, we've heard 7,000 stories, and from that we made conclusions from the 94 calls to action that we issued to Canada. So there's some very encouraging results from our calls to action. For example, in academia at the universities now, it's mandatory that they learn about the residential school history. They learn about Indigenous Crown relationships. They learn about our treaties. They learn about anti-racism through the educational system. And all the faculties of medicine, education, nursing, all the schools from kindergarten to grade 12, it's now mandatory to learn about this history. So that's making an impact already because we filed our report in 2015. So we've had a chance already to look back at the impacts in our country, I'll say. In fact, I'll close with the most recent discussion that we're having. One of the principles of reconciliation we came up with as the first reconciliation principle was to adopt and endorse the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And right now in Canada, there's a bill being debated, Bill C-15, that calls for the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples across Canada. It's very controversial, I might say, but it's just to give you an example, in the justice system, the judges, the lawyers, the law societies are all having to study our report. The private industry, the corporations are also looking at how do they incorporate it into their national policies as companies. So I see, for example, in the field of sports, an awful lot of change happening through the leagues and teams who are advancing reconciliations through sport across the country. Our own people are having healing circles, healing ceremonies. Some people tell us that the best healing for me is going back to my culture, going back to my language if I had lost it, to relearn it or to learn it, because that's how I'm healing. And someone said, go to the bush and listen to the trees or talk to the trees. So there's a whole unraveling of new ways of following up on our calls to action. Because we found early on that it's actually a spectrum. It was very hard, I found, to go from truth to reconciliation, because it's actually a spectrum where everyone has a right to know the truth, but also where there's harm that has been done, an apology to be given. And if an apology is granted, then forgiveness opportunity has to be presented. Then you will begin to feel healing, justice, and then you can begin the path of reconciliation. So we're underway with our calls to action in Canada in a very good way, I think.
Thank you, Chief Wilton Littlechild, for those incredibly valuable words. I see we are practically out of time, but I would like to ask if you, Kusla, have any comments on the Chief's closing remarks, and perhaps if you see any hope with perhaps the election of Ms. Haaland as the Secretary for the Interior. How do you see your future?
Thanks, and Hatu, everyone. I'm from Chumash territory in California. I'm going to provide some slides to go out with the recording of this presentation, since I won't have a chance to do a formal introduction today. But I did want to thank Chief Littlechild for his comments, particularly because we are struggling here, I think, in California with scoping our project, right? So historically, we have many different moments and many different crimes that have been committed by many different entities and states and corporations and so forth. So we're really struggling to kind of narrow it down. And we only have about 5 years to do so. So the California Truth and Healing Commission, is set to kind of expire our work within 5 years. So we are kind of inspired by the work that's been done in Canada around the residential schools. And we're also kind of daunted by the task at hand, because we're not only dealing with residential schools and Indian Child Welfare Act effects, termination era, genocide, all land displacement and theft, and all of those things. It's a real struggle. So our hope is that with Secretary Haaland, right, and by our I mean mine and my capacity as a Native person in California, not in my capacity as a council member. But our hope is that Secretary Haaland will really help champion the first acknowledgement that these issues are ongoing and exist, right? Obviously, her visibility is huge for Native issues, but also to kind of help us see a new landscape ahead. So not only has she come into that position, but with her, the folks that are sitting in the solicitor's office or in the USDA, all of our various administrative agencies within the executive branch have been transformed. So we have a huge number of Indigenous people now working in those offices. They know the tools, right? They're lawyers. They've worked with and in Indian country for many years. So that's a great sign for us, because the people making the decisions, in addition to the leadership, right? So the daily decisions about water distribution and who has which rights, like those are going to be often led by Indigenous people. So it's not just the head, the entire administrative body has taken new shape. So we're quite enthusiastic about that and hope that both recognized and unrecognized tribes in California can have some greater political standing to have our issues addressed.
Thank you. And with those remarks, I think it's time to close the panel. I want to thank the panelists, Marcus Stewart, Liv Ingersson-By, Kusla Kessler-Mata, and most of all, Chief Wilton Littlechild for joining us. Antti, do you have any closing words for this occasion?
I do, Petra, and I just also want to say I think we all share the feeling when Chief Wilton Littlechild started to speak about the spectrum from truth to reconciliation. He was just getting to where we should continue. And I just want to recognize, Chief, your role being a survivor from the boarding school, leading into your peoples, having that space to share how your personal transformation led into a potential transformation for not only society, but especially the survivors. And this is part of acting in that spectrum and the beautiful leadership you provided. Petra and all of in these panels, you did really well with the technical complications and the shortness of time. And I think it's only appropriate to end with an Indigenous voice. And I'll come back to you, Petra, with the question actually, because part of Our Silent Struggle video, there's a moment where your Vice President, Ida-Maria Helander, who together with Christopher and Hannah was instrumental in making this event happen, speaks about her observation, how in her family, the historical trauma is being transformed to new generations, that there's this silence and how it continues to hurt new generations. And you were bold, despite all the mistrust and everything that was going on in the policy and by the government, still to believe in this process. So Petra, tell us what in your view would make the process successful? What have you taken out of this that you would wish to be seen in the finished process?
Thank you for the question. I remember vividly discussing the very same story you mentioned with Ida-Maria. We've talked about it many, many times. And I think when the chief was speaking of the spectrum of reconciliation, I think that really resonated with me as well. And I think really, at least in the Sámi context, I think there is a certain naivete to be seen from the Finns and the Finnish government as to what reconciliation actually means and what the trauma of Indigenous communities really means. And I think until the majority people in Finland and the state actually can see the information in front of them and understand not just the scope of reconciliation needed for the Indigenous community of the Sámi, but also this spectrum of trauma that is inflicted upon the Indigenous communities. Only then can we actually have a discussion on equal and honest terms with the state as to what true reconciliation might mean, because I feel like right now we are in a discussion where the only thing that Finland knows about reconciliation is the act of asking for forgiveness and being forgiven, and that I feel like somehow that dominates the discussion on what reconciliation is. But I've said this in other occasions as well, but I really do feel like Indigenous people are not obligated to forgive anything. And I think because we are not obligated to forgive anything, also the state should move away from the rhetoric of asking for forgiveness, because some things cannot be forgiven, but rather you just simply heal from them. And so I think understanding that damage and that spectrum of trauma and spectrum of reconciliation is really a key for a reconciliation process to even begin at the best of terms.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And this will be recorded and the recording will be shared, and we'll take notes, and this will be shared and used by the UN Permanent Forum on issuing the final statements and conclusions of the Permanent Forum. With much gratitude, I wish you all a really good day. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Kiitos.